The second talk in this series of 10 talks about the Kahns will be about Franziska, our great ancestor, Franziska Kahn. She was the grandmother of my grandfather, and she died in 1892, at the age of 83. At 92, in 1892. My mother was born, your Aunt Ida Netta, was born in 1890, so she was 2. And Emil, my mother's younger brother, wasn't born yet. And there was Franziska, who had married her husband Michael Kahn, our ancestor, who discovered bed feathers, in 1826. She survived her husband by 30 years. And she was clearly a very formidable lady. And it may well be that we owe our great fortune, good fortune, to her as much as to Michael, whom I feel she rather dominated. And she was certainly extremely good at business and a no-nonsense lady. And she was, according to the literature which I have consulted, very pretty when she was young. She had a nickname, Sprinks, can't pronounce it, Sprinx. God knows where that comes from. Doesn't sound Hebrew to me, because remember, she spoke Yiddish. She learned German when she got married at the age of 16, 1826. She learned German. Now, one of the reasons why we have reason to be very interested in her is because she kept memoirs, of sections of memoirs, and some of which I inherited. And they were written in, you see, her native language was Yiddish. And she went to a Jewish school, and there she was taught to write in cursive Hebrew lettering. So to keep a diary in German was not easy, and her spelling was quite abominable, and quite atrocious. And I'm sure very interested to experts, historians. And as a matter of fact, since I inherited a typewritten transcript of one chapter of her memoirs, I had occasion to send this to 2 historians who were delighted because they had not seen anything like it. And one professor in Freiburg, Professor Schulin, and another local historian, Ebert, I think his name is, in Steppach or near Steppach, of the area of Steppach. So this is an extraordinary document. And it is extraordinary because it deals with a chapter in our history, the Revolution of 1848, and what the Kahns contributed to this revolution. Now I have to tell you, some of whom remember 1967, the 60s in North America. Many of you were born after that. Some of you were born before that. But you all have heard of the 60s in North America and Europe, where a kind of revolutionary sentiment swept across the country. The revolution was in the air. A revolution of a cultural kind in 1967, in 1848, where a similar revolution swept the world, it was political, primarily political. Remember, have you heard of Karl Marx? Karl Marx wrote the Communist Manifesto, great piece of work, in early 1848, February 1848. 1848 was the year of the revolution. And it was preceded by years of misery in Germany and elsewhere, because there was a famine, and there was a shortage of potatoes, and there was not only potatoes, were not enough of them, and they were diseased, pain and starvation, and huge emigration to the United States from in the 1840s, comparable to the Irish thing in 18, also was similar at the same time in the 40s, and great misery, and therefore the time for revolution. And when there is unrest, social unrest, it's bad for the Jews. And there were anti-Semitic rioting everywhere. Because, for example, in the Odenwald, which is not far from where the Kahns lived, north of there were, in the villages, there were mass meetings demanding the expulsion of the local dukes, of the nobility, and the expulsion of the Jews together. And everywhere the Jews felt threatened, and with good reason, because the Jews were the money lenders, and everybody owed money to the Jews, and you certainly hate the people to whom you owe money. So there is no record, as far as I know, of any trouble in Steppach. But in other villages, there was trouble. And so for the Jews, the revolution had a kind of a double meaning. One was they were threatened by the revolutionaries, who were, of course, many of them owed money and were anti-Semitic anyway. And also because the bright ones among the revolutionaries were in the forefront of the revolution. And the two Kahn brothers, Bernhard and Hermann, were very active. They were freedom fighters. Our ancestors, the freedom fighters. And they got, and when in early 1848, there were meetings and mass meetings. They were in the avant-garde. They were the forefront of revolution. They spoke, they made speeches, and they also, since they were literate, wrote pamphlets and brochures. All this came out later in court proceedings, and it's well documented. Our ancestors were revolutionaries. Don't forget it. And Franziska, the old lady, not so old then, wrote it down. And so there were her two sons. Emil, the younger one, was only 16. But he was apparently also active already. So they joined, they managed to get arms. They joined some kind of voluntary brigades of some sort, and they went to fight. They went to fight the army of of Baden, of the Grand Duke. The Grand Duke of Baden, in mid-1948, thought it a good idea to flee, and he flew across the French border to Alsace. He returned later. So the revolutionary armies, in which two Kahns played a prominent role, were quite successful at the beginning. But Leopold, the Grand Duke, having been expelled, or he He gave up and fled. What do you do when you flee in a revolution and your throne is threatened? You call in the Prussians. You call in the Prussian army. There was a kind of federation, and you called in the Prussians. And they called in the Prussians. The Prussians were delighted to come. And the Prussians came, heavily armed, large numbers, and they put down the revolution. Franziska wrote about this. She got a news that Hermann had been killed. She was out of her mind. She told her husband, Michael, all this she wrote about, go and find Hermann. And he took his horse and wagon, and he tried to find Hermann, and went from village to village to find her. And they found Hermann. Hermann came home. He was in a terrible state. He had spent many nights on the sleeping outside. The goddamn Russians were after him. And she said she could hardly recognize Hermann. But anyhow, he went home. He came home. And then okay, I must pause for a moment. The Revolution of 1848 had a very profound meaning in German history, because in 1848 delegates from all over Germany met in Frankfurt, my native city, in the Paulskirche, in the Church of St. Paul. And there was a kind of general assembly, a constituent assembly, to make a constitution for Germany, for a united Germany. Germany could have gone either way. It could have gone in a democratic way, as was planned by the assembly in Frankfurt, or it could have gone the way it did. Because the Constituent Assembly in Frankfurt offered the imperial crown to the King of Prussia and said, if you agree to our constitution, you can become the king of all of Germany, or emperor, or whatever you want to call yourself. And the King of Prussia, Frederick William IV, said, no, thank you, I will not accept a democratic constitution. On those terms, I will not play ball. And so it went the other way. The history of Prussia, of Germany, Prussia then became the head of a united Germany, not democratic. In 1848, there was okay, back to Franziska and to Kahn's. In 1848, the assembly met. They offered the crown to the King of Prussia. The King of Prussia said, no, thank you. So there was, in 1949, there was another war. And the Kahns fought again, and the Prussians were after them. But they managed to escape across the Swiss border. And so I'm talking about the two main characters here. And they are Bernhard and Hermann. Bernhard and Hermann. And Hermann, and they both fled, and Hermann went to Antwerp, and Bernhard went to France first, I think, and then he went to the United States. And in 1849, Franziska, horrified by the events, because her two sons, the freedom fighters, were indicted and convicted in absentia. They were by then had fled. And the mother, and I'm sure old Michael, were by no means delighted with their rebellious sons, went to the Grand Duke. The old Grand Duke, the one who had fled, had returned, but then died, Leopold. But a new Grand Duke took over in 1850, I think, and who was a liberal, nicer man. And Franziska, fearless Franziska, went to she had gone before, and they always chased the old Jewish woman out. But she succeeded to see the Grand Duke, and she threw herself at and he said, "Get up, lady, my dear lady, get up." He was very nice with her. She described this, and then she said, "Do something for my boys, my poor boys. They are innocent. They don't mean any harm." And the Grand Duke said, "Oh, my dear lady, I'll do whatever I can, but it's not in my power. You have to go and see the Minister of Justice, and then there are courts, and what can I do?" And so, however, in the end, relentlessly, she succeeded that the case against him was dropped for lack of evidence. And Hermann returned home to mother and father. Bernhard, however, she failed. And Bernhard left, could not return to Germany. He was in Switzerland. He wrote letters to his father, of which one still exists, in which he showed that he was doing business in bed feathers while he was in Basel. And it was really a business letter. But then Bernhard went to the United States of America and stayed there for some years. Nothing is known, not very much is known. He went to Albany, not much is known. He became an American citizen, learned about banking, and then returned home. By then, the bed feather factory had been moved to Mannheim, the big center, an industrial city on the rise. And about that I will talk next time.